Real talk. Real topics. Real solutions. This is MSR Forefront with your host, Stephanetta Harmon.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for tuning into the latest installment of the MSR Forefront and our roundtable discussion on issues pertinent to Black communities in Minnesota and beyond. Of course, I am your host, Stephanetta Harmon, and tonight we're talking about reparations via a groundbreaking commission that has been formed in St. Paul. For those of you who look, y'all been watching the news. Minnesota continues to be a ground zero for the Civil Rights 2.0 movement. George Floyd's killing put the state in the epicenter of civil unrest, demands for change, and renewed focus on racial and economic justice disparities within the Black communities. And among those demands are calls for reparations that are reaching a fever pitch across the country. And the city of St. Paul is looking to turn those conversations into action. Last month, the St. Paul City Council members voted to form a new commission called the St. Paul Recovery Act Community Reparations Commission. Long title because they got long work to do, to study what reparations could look like for African-American residents of the city who are direct descendant of slaves. And tonight we have with us the sponsor of the resolution, City Council member Jane Prince of Ward 7, and Trey Cruz, co-chair of the Green Party and co-chair of the new commission. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you this evening?
It's great to be here, Stephanetta.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for joining in this conversation. And, you know, we want to know all about this commission, what it means, how you got here, how this got on your desk, you know, to even get to something that somebody like Representative Conyers was trying to do for how many years? 30 years?
Yeah.
And retired and it still didn't happen. And here you are, you know, pushing on ground zero in Minnesota in St. Paul and got something where you got the commission, or excuse me, the city council to apologize for institutional racism. So we got to talk about all of this. Just having that on record. I was like, wait, they apologize? Is that written somewhere?
It is. It is.
Wow. So I don't even know who to start with first at this point because I'm super excited. Well, Councilmember Prince, Jane is getting her audio together here. How did this end up on your desk?
Well, I'll tell you how it happened, and it was definitely Trey who has been doing the work, organizing.
Okay, well, when she pops out, you pop in, Trey.
I don't know how I turn that off. Hopefully that'll stop. But I have, Trey has been working on this for years, and that's where it came from. I mean, he and I met years ago when he was organizing on the East Side back in 2016 and 17. But then I got to talk to him at a community conference. He was doing a session on reparations about 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I went to it because the reading that I had been doing about Black history and trying to figure out how did we get to this terrible place with all these inequities and disparities. And Trey made the case for reparations that I found extremely compelling. Mm. So a year and a half ago, the city of Evanston, Illinois, passed a reparations ordinance. And I called Trey and I said, here's a model. Let's get together and talk about what that might look like. And he was way ahead. He'd already written the St. Paul Recovery Act ordinance. And it was a matter of, I mean, that was a year and a half ago. Wow. We got together and we formed with the Eastside Freedom Library in St. Paul. We started a reparations reading group. And that had been meeting, that's been meeting since, it's a year this month, Trey.
Yeah,
wow.
So a reading group?
Yeah, a reading group through the Eastside Freedom Library. Of course, it all has ended up being on Zoom because of COVID. But we were doing this really important reading about Black history, about slavery, and then everything after slavery, which I don't have to tell you, but for people that I know, getting them to understand that slavery led to Jim Crow, led to the lynching period, led to segregation and discrimination and redlining and racial covenants and mass incarceration. It's like it's all part of the same continuum. And after so Trey had done all the work, and then of course after George Floyd's tragic murder at the hands of police in Minnesota, it just became clear that we need to not go backwards. We need to do something important. And he had done the work and brought it forward to my colleagues. And actually, Stefanetta, every one of the city council members signed on as a sponsor.
Oh, wow.
When we brought this forward the week of Martin Luther King's birthday, it had sponsorship from 7 council members. So there was no doubt that it was going to pass unanimously. And Trey needs to tell the story, because that is the work of the St. Paul Reparations Steering Committee, that in the St. Paul Recovery Act and Reparations Steering Committee that he put together and that did the political organizing. And it's a great story, but the community deserves all the credit.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, Trey, what has it been, like 6-7 years you've been grinding on this? What has been the process like for you getting something that's been vision and being able to actually see it now moving forward in some sort of way? And then what are we seeing move forward? Like,
it's
what does it mean?
surreal. It's still kind of surreal. I was, I mean, even when we knew it was going to pass, like once it happened, I was like, oh, wow, dude, we really just did that. And then thinking about Marcus Garvey, or, people that came before, Queen Mother Moore, even Johnny Cochran was working on this, on some of his last days, he was working on this. So it was like, we're standing on really big shoulders, and we're dealing with 400 years of oppression in our ancestors. So it's like, wow, this is really very serious work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I was just really excited about that. And just, so where we're going from here now is we're going to be setting up a legislative advisory committee.
Okay.
And, that will start doing some of the work of getting the commission ready, like creating the applications and stuff, like who's going to be on it, what are the areas of focus of the work and stuff is going to be doing. And then I think we're going to be, even before that, we're going to be doing some more prep work as far as like community outreach. Like this is part of it right now.
Right.
What we're doing right now, educating the community about the racial wealth gap, some of the St. Paul Recovery Act and what it's going to do, and why reparations is very important. Okay. And trying to get some of the people like yourself and just getting the community involved in the work.
About it. So if you're just tuning in right now, Forefront, we are talking reparations, and we're not just talking big picture reparations like we need it for the communities, but we're talking about it in terms of real action that's happening in St. Paul with and it's a long title. I'm gonna get this right though. The St. Paul Recovery Act Community Reparations Commission. And what I'm understanding, it's 6 months. Is that
Well, what will happen is, as Trey mentioned, we're working right now doing the organizing and the background work to put together an advisory committee by the city council.
Okay.
That will do the research. We'll generate the ideas. What we've talked about a little bit, but it really needs to be led by the community, is doing some truth-telling forums to try. The city is very prepared in terms of our city departments to come forward to talk about the ways in which the city itself has perpetrated the land uses, the development patterns that have been an underlying factor in the nature of discrimination and disparities in our city. Okay. So there will be a truth-telling process, we assume, during that legislative advisory committee period. That committee is supposed to be seated by our date that Trey came up with for our goal. We said 6 months, and that is right around Juneteenth. So that's our goal for being able to seat that committee and start the important background work to create an ordinance and to create a permanent commission in St. Paul that will steer the city's investments into the future to eliminate disparities in our city. And obviously, I want to be really clear about the fact that the council is kind of the vehicle to get this done, but we really, Trey is really committed to ensuring that the leadership for all of this comes from the African American community. I mean, it just so happens that we're at a point right now where we are fortunate in St. Paul to have our first African American mayor, but none of the council members are African American at this point. And so the ideas and the real, the impetus from it has come from the Black community, and the work that the commission does needs to be driven by the committee, the advisory committee needs to be made up of the community, and then the larger African American community needs to drive that work.
And just, before we Trey, just a second here, this is a lot to unpack. So folks, if you have questions, please drop them in. I have 50 of them. I don't know how many I'm going to get through.
Great.
But let's think about this in terms of just even saying we're talking reparations, right? There's an ordinance for it. The city has apologized for institutional racism. What does reparations look like? Especially Trey, what's the visioning that you've garnered over the work that you've done over the past 5-6 years on what that looks like? Because it's not just economics, right?
Exactly. Yep. So first, I just want to put it out there. These are just my ideals of what I'm thinking, but the commission and the legislative advisory committee is going to have to do that work. So we want the community to be involved in the process, but we also want the community to understand the racial wealth gap and where we're at and how serious it is. But so some of it would be around land. So even I just seen my cousin on the news, Mikhail Davis, and they just started a Rondo Realty something. And so I know they're talking about the right to return back to Rondo.
Right to return.
Yep. So that some of that work could be a part of it, just helping, talking to each other, seeing how we can fine tune it to make it a reparatory justice program. Health, wellness, and healing for Black families and community is a crucial component of it. I say this all the time, but we used to have Dr. Abrams, Dr. Crutchfield. We could go see them, and we really don't have those type of places here in St. Paul anymore. So we really need a place where, even St. Paul, we're in a really good, post-traumatic slavery syndrome, and then coming up with treatments for it and things that. So health, wellness, and healing for Black families and communities also addresses gun violence. We feel like it can address gun violence. But again, none of these things are set in stone, but this is some of the work that
you'll be putting this group together for people to come and really brainstorm and workshop it. And, I want to reiterate those things that he said. It's politics, it's housing, it's, redlining, it's the education access, it's home ownership, it's health. It is that PTSD. We have Black PTSD in America because one thing follows another thing follows another thing. And it's like we, from day one till now, and I'm saying this because I know when we're having these conversations that folks say, well, this didn't happen in this lifetime. You've had generations. And then we just had on the news AOC, Representative Cortez talking about, don't make me move forward. Don't make me move on. Don't make me don't don't deny me to address my trauma.
Right.
Right. You know, AOC, when she talked about her experience on
Yep.
January 6th, and she's like, I can't move on because I have to process it.
Right.
And African Americans have been processing since,
Right.
since being here, since been
Right.
here, do you know? And so I just want you to really like explain what that racial wealth gap looks like. Do you have some numbers that talk about like, how much more do we have to work?
Well, that's the thing. We've been working for 400 years, and and we were not getting paid we've been getting paid or earning wages for less than we've been working for free longer.
Mm-hmm.
We did slavery longer than we've been free. So that just creating wealth, putting that into perspective. Then what she was speaking about before was the building generational wealth. So we've been talking about racial covenants. I don't know if you've seen, I'm pretty sure you have seen the Jim Crow of the North that talks about the racial covenants in Minneapolis. So now they're doing mapping St. Paul that is unearthing the racial covenants here. So those racial covenants affected wealth building in St. Paul and Minneapolis and throughout the United States. The whites in America have like 90% of the wealth. Blacks have 2.6% of the wealth. And we believe that reparations is the best way to begin to address that. Black women have the most student loan debt. The Black middle class family in St. Paul, there's different. It could be 30. I know the median might be 15,000, and then for whites it could be 60,000, or maybe 30,000. But it's still a big gap. So those are that's how big the racial wealth gap is and how critical it is. According to Forbes magazine, by 2050, the median income for Black people will be at 0. And another addressing the criminal injustice system is another big part that relies in the 13th Amendment. Even Chief of Police Todd Axel, before COVID hit, I know that he had a press conference talking about removing slavery from the Minnesota Constitution. So and slavery is still in the 13th Amendment. Slavery is still in the Constitution if you're
in prison. Right, if you're incarcerated, yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this commission now, because there's still we have a lot of commissions, a lot of committees, a lot of research and study on things that in the Black community that we know exist, and now we're waiting for somebody to come tell us that it exists. Great. So what does this commission look like in terms of once you like this legislative body? Because it sounds like a lot of process. Can you break down what that process is on how you're getting people seated? Who gets to, is this like, how are they chosen? How do they apply? And then who's accountable? Where's how do you do the accountability on this? Yeah.
Stefanetta, I'm really sensitive to that, because this cannot be just more talk. In the Twin Cities and in Minnesota, where we're so good at studying things. All I can say is there is some process. Yesterday, the city council looked at a timeline that has been laid out for the appointment. The way it looks right now, the applications will be, once we figure out the criteria for the people who are going to serve, the applications will be open in April. The steering committee that Trahern has been heading up is going to be doing a lot of organizing over the next couple of months to reach out very specifically to the Black churches, to the community organizations, to get the word out to everybody that this is happening, and that it is their voices that are going to lead this effort. And if you look at the examples of other cities, which, when we talk about, well, it's going to take this initiative, we'll work with this initiative and we'll combine all these different things that are out there. I mean, what the Evanston, Illinois ordinance has done is it has identified a revenue stream that actually will fund the work that their commission does. And in Evanston, they have Illinois has recreational marijuana, and the city is taking the tax from recreational marijuana in Evanston to create this fund. Okay. And so, nothing is off the table in terms of the potential of us being able to identify a revenue source for this. And that could include philanthropic support. The other thing that the committee, with Trahern's leadership on this, the committee has included within the resolution that we're also going to be reaching out to private and institutional entities within St. Paul to do their own truth telling and figure out the way in which they will be involved in making reparations a reality in St. Paul. So there's a public commitment for sure. And there's also the fact that we are all of us who have worked in government. I've been on the council since 2016, but I've been involved in community work my whole adult life. And, we know that investments have been made in the past that didn't improve things, that didn't make things better. I mean, today, this morning, I heard a discussion on public radio about the Page Amendment, and that the reason we need Justice Page's amendment is to say millions and billions of dollars have been put into our public schools, but we still can't guarantee that kids are getting what they need in our public schools. So I think that, I think we all owe it to George Floyd to make sure that when we bring these efforts forward, when we bring a resolution forward in a reparations commission, it sure as hell better be for real, because I expect our Black community to hold us accountable, that this cannot be window dressing, that it actually has to bring about real change. I was in a meeting today about that MnDOT, our Department of Transportation, is going to be rethinking I-94 running through our two cities. And for our Rondo community, for our African-American community in St. Paul, anything that says very positively, oh, great, MnDOT's going to rethink 94, sounds like trouble. What we know,
it's another level of trauma.
Right. What we know about Rondo was that was a growing, vital, developing middle-class African-American community in the heart of our city, a successful business district, like Trey talking about, that everybody knew everybody and there were jobs for kids and home ownership. And I just saw a statistic today about that $157 million in home equity was lost through the destruction of the Rondo neighborhood. And then when it came through the east side, well, people on the east side, if they lost their homes, they got money and they could go buy a home somewhere else. But the Rondo neighborhood, if you were a Black homeowner, then we had redlining and we had racial covenants. So this has got to be for real, and the community needs to hold us accountable. Like, there can't be any more BS about this stuff. It's got to be real, and it's got to make a difference. And what we know is, that quote of Paul Wellstone's, that when we all do better, we all do better. Reparations to the African-American community is going to make life better for everybody in Minnesota.
Right.
When we can all be successful.
So Trey, we need to get you in on this. You've been on this. St. Paul. I know. Wait, someone asked if this includes Minneapolis. Let me just ask this real quick. So, it's the Twin Cities, but is this just St. Paul, or will this impact, or will you do a sister type of reach out to Minneapolis?
Well, this is the St. Paul Recovery Act so this one is specifically for St. Paul, but the ordinance, the great thing about the ordinance is it makes, so how you hear, I'm not having to say much because Jane is a reparations advocate now.
Right? I'm hearing it.
You know, and the bill creates, it calls the whole city, St. Paul City Council now is our reparations activists. So they're advocating for the city of St. Paul is advocating for reparations at the state and federal level. So City Councilman Cam Gordon and some of his colleagues are working on, they passed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So they did say they wanted to connect with some of that work. And so I think there's going to be some collaboration with that. But the bill the resolution calls for the St. Paul City Council to advocate for reparations at the state and federal level.
Right.
So, and we're asking people right now during Black History Month to encourage Congress to vote on HR 40 and get that.
And can you explain HR 40 for those who aren't aware of Conyers' original bill?
So HR 40 is basically the federal version of the St. Paul Recovery Act. It sets up a 13 commission committee to study reparations at the federal level. Some of the people we've been working with, we've got some edits that we want to add to HR 40 that discusses cash payments and some other things too. But we do encourage people to call your congressperson and have them break HR 40 to a vote for Black History Month.
Okay.
Well, and Trey, wasn't it great today? I sent an email because Trey had said, we're hoping they're going to vote on it soon. And so I sent our resolution to Congresswoman Betty McCollum's office and said, I just want to be sure we should be doing this more formally, but please know that we passed this resolution. So when HR 40 comes up, we really want you to vote for it. They got back to me right away and said, Betty has signed on as a sponsor the last 2 times that it has come forward. So it was just so great for us to learn that our Congresswoman was way ahead of us.
Right. I didn't know she was a sponsor myself. So that was exciting to learn too. And
so you're learning people have actually been supporting pre-news and make me feel good conversations. Because, that is a concern. Folks are like, well, is this optics right now?
Yep.
Right.
And Trey, you mentioned cash payments, right?
Yeah.
That you want to put on HR 40. And I'm assuming and hoping that that's going to be a conversation wholeheartedly within the St. Paul piece. I know even Rose McGee said stop avoiding economics continues to be avoided in order to keep white people comfortable. I do have a question on positioning when we talk about cash payments in terms of how do you see communities becoming ready for whatever influx that is? Do you know what I mean? Like, because if you're giving someone something who hasn't had it, where does it go? Because we don't have the other resources like financial readiness or even long-term fiduciary planning that we miss out on. You learn new things about stocks every day that we aren't taught, that other communities are taught. So just that whole conversation, what are your thoughts on the cash payment piece? And what are your thoughts on the on how we ready our communities for the conversation and for what happens next?
Well, understanding the racial wealth gap, I think there needs to be education about what is our real, that's what really sparked me up again when I started really realizing the racial wealth data. And was like, wow, I'm not the only person who's suffering or struggling. This is what is actually happening in the Black community. So I think we start having an honest conversation with ourselves about our financial situation in America, that we will start looking at getting us prepared to handle direct cash payments and stuff like that. So I think we do need to get together with everything that we're talking about. There needs to be specialists about dealing with and preparing the community, whether it's about home ownership, whether it's about our finances, whether it's about health. And that's the work. That's what I kind of envision the committee and the commissions doing, bringing in experts and specialists. But there's some learning that they have to do, and then there's some teach. So they'll be learning, but they'll also be teaching.
Okay. And we know this wealth gap. I know we're talking about it in abstract terms. Y'all, white folks have 10 times generational wealth than the Black counterparts. It's 10 times. We're talking like 170,000 to 16,000. We're not talking like just, I'm trying to catch up with you to go from a manager to a CEO. We're talking about from poverty to the 1%. And it's hardest felt and hardest seen in, in our minority community, especially Black communities. And as you're doing this work, how do people get in touch with, contact you to find out more about this? Will there be a website set up? Because there's another part of these conversations when we say, hey, we want to move something in the community. Everyone doesn't have access to a computer.
Right.
Everyone doesn't have access to Wi-Fi to watch the conversations or to log on to wherever something is. What kind of outreach and how can they find you, to participate, to get in on the conversation as you're building the commission and moving forward when you have the other events and meetings?
Well, we have not put up a city website yet. The steering committee has put up a website, so we can talk about that. But anyone is welcome to contact my office.
They call
and it's jane.prince@stpaul.gov. So jane.prince@stpaul.gov.
Okay.
And we're going to be, we're trying to collect all the contact information from people who want to be kept involved. And we'll be putting it up on the city website hopefully soon.
Okay.
And Trey, maybe you want to talk about the website. The other thing I'd love to do is encourage anybody who's interested to join our reading group, which is it's the Reparations Reading Group. And actually at our gathering on Tuesday night, we're going to be reading the resolution and some of the support documents that we have about what we just passed, so that we can help people understand what we're doing. But it's the second Tuesday of each month at 6:30 p.m. and it's on Zoom, and we'd love to have people join us. So again, there was our first book.
Yeah, we read The Debt by Randall Robinson there.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the first book we read. And that was a great kickoff to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the St. Paul Recovery Act, you can call Jane's office and hit me on Facebook and stuff too.
Okay, and we'll definitely drop the comments, drop the links in the Facebook comments for people to find. Talking about this resolution, because it's still heady, right? It's still, a lot on the head. Trey, like even the work that you were doing beforehand, even with the Green Party and, pushing this conversation forward, what has been the response? I mean, not just even from white folks, but Black folks in the community when you're saying, hey, we need to get reparations on the table for the community?
It's really changed from when we first started. We were getting a lot of pushback, but especially with COVID, I think it really showed that how much we really need reparations, especially with George Floyd. Great article came out in Los Angeles Times about George Floyd and his family and how 500 acres was stolen from his great grandfather and stuff. So going back to that generational wealth piece, he wasn't not just him. There was millions of acres of farmland stolen from African Americans, and that also affected generational wealth. So when COVID hit, I think it made it the conversation changed, but also doing the education, talking to people about the racial wealth gap, and then just some of the promotions. It wasn't just me. There's other groups out here who have been pushing reparations. So I think when we first started, it was like 56% of Black people supported reparations. Now we're up to like 75, 80%. So,
okay.
And that comes through just doing that political education and doing, being on the ground with the work, and in social media too, and using graphics and graphs and stuff to explain that.
And who qualifies for this? How do you have that conversation? Are you born in St. Paul in order to get? I'm serious. Like that's the real question. And then, like me, I'm Liberian, right? But my direct ancestors, we could go back to Philly. because I'm a Americo-Liberian.
No doubt.
You know, and so someone may ask that kind of question, like, how do you trace the roots? Because, you know, now you're going to have like the same way like the, you know, indigenous communities are doing something. What are the thoughts so far? Because I know it will change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, none of this is set in stone. The commission will do the work. A lot of things where we're saying, like, if your family was here since like 1965, that you would qualify for. But and then they said, I think Sandy Darity has a good book that explains a lot of it. But there might be Sandy Darity.
Okay.
We're really trying to get in touch with him to be a part of this, I hope.
Can you spell Darity so we can find it in the community?
SADYDARITY. He's an economist from Duke.
Okay. Just found it.
Yup.
William Darity, also known as Sandy. I will drop a link to his book as well in the comments. No, but that's a serious question that we hear. And I know St. Paul is more primed for it in terms of, if you look at Minneapolis is more transient. St. Paul has, you know, longstanding families more so in the St. Paul region. So I think that's important to have that conversation about, like, how long have you been in the state? How do you get impacted with it? And I'm going to come back like, yo, folks want to get to work, right?
Yeah. We're
like,
ready.
I'm excited for you at this moment. Like, oh my gosh, like, yes.
I'm honored that you had us bring us on here too.
I know it's super early and things are still in motion. And I know Jane talked about reading the resolution. And because you're saying you need to go through and break down pieces, what do you two think are what have been the biggest questions or challenges that you've heard as you've been talking about this in the community and how you move forward?
Well, for me, kind of what you were just talking about, who gets it, how, because a lot of people even was like, well, do I got to live in St. Paul, or what if I moved and we lived, or what if I was born in St. Paul and moved, like you're saying, what if I was one of those original families or something that, what if I was the Hickmans or something and then I moved or something like that? So a lot of those questions have been kind of the rougher questions for me. Other questions, I think I was kind of prepared for it, about, like, why should you get reparations when you never went through slavery and stuff like that.
Okay. And Jane, on your side?
I've been surprised, and it may be that the word just hasn't gotten out as far as I think it would, but I've been surprised at the positive response from the whole community, and the number of people who have reached out who've said, who may not be African American, but who've said, I want to be part of this effort. I want to help. Tell me how I can be an ally. We have, a really outstanding guy stepped forward to help us with some organizing efforts and to think about how we're going to do fundraising for organizing work. And, I think the other thing is, obviously, Stefanetta, is that, people are worried about exactly what you said earlier. It's like, well, there's going to be this advisory committee and then there's going to be a commission, and how's this all going to work? And I will be honest, when I think about payments, or when we've talked about payments, the capacity is obviously greatest at the federal level to actually make payments. But nothing is off the table in St. Paul as far as that goes. What we know is we're coming out of a really difficult year financially for cities. And we also know, in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, because of the way our state funds education and cities and so forth, and that there have been these, they've slashed the support to cities, that our cities aren't sitting on large pots of money to be able to start thinking about payments. But it's really important to all of us on the council that this be led by the community and that nothing is off the table. If we have an opportunity, as I said earlier, to identify a funding source to start making some really meaningful investments in home ownership, down payment programs, whatever it might be. I would guess, just saying what I know the reality is of city funding, I believe that the things that we would start out with would be things like that, would be programs that were designed to help African Americans purchase homes, because the gap, the home ownership gap is so extreme. And we were contacted by the Family Housing Fund, who said, we're doing this program where we want to address home ownership disparities in the African American community. So the framework for some of this stuff is already there, and if we can identify additional funding sources to make these programs available to everybody who wants to participate, because right now home ownership, heck, even affordable rental is out of so many people's ability to afford. But home ownership means that you have a long-term stake and you build equity. And that's what we need to be providing. And we've got to build
community.
Right. And we've got to just take that head on. And so I think we have a chance to fund some of these things in a meaningful way that will start to more meaningfully address disparities than we have in the past. I'll just say, from another of my own experiences, my dad was a combat veteran in World War II and came home, not knowing how he was going to make ends meet. There was a housing shortage at that time, but the GI Bill allowed him to buy a house and for my family to have this middle class life. And that same opportunity, because of redlining and mortgage assistance not being available to African Americans like it was to white veterans, the GI Bill didn't allow the same guys that were serving with my dad to come home and build generational wealth for their families. So I think that these are the stories that people can understand. Gee, I did have a benefit that I never thought about that I had that my Black neighbors didn't have. So I think I just want to be clear. I think that there's a lot of ways that this is going to come together. And I don't want to make any excuses about reparations payments. But the fact is, I think it's going to take a while for us to figure out how we get to payments, but nothing is off the table.
Okay. And Trey, you about to say something?
Yep, and I was just saying that so at the city level, definitely we don't want to take nothing at the table, but we know that the cities are strapped for cash, and that's why the city, the St. Paul Recovery Act calls for the St. Paul City Council to advocate for reparations at the state and federal level, and that's where we definitely would be expecting cash payments to come from. And then the one part, if you guys ever get a chance to go and watch the video of the St. Paul City Council, that was one of the most, because we didn't plan it out. So I read a statement and addressed Dred Scott, and then Jane read the resolution, which apologized for enslaving Dred Scott and military slavery at Fort Snelling. So I thought that was a great part of it. Also, I think because of COVID, the Black business community was hit really hard. And I think another part of the St. Paul Recovery Act is building up a strong Black infrastructure in the city of St. Paul. And I know there was some of our elders wanted to see like the Rondo Corridor happen, like a place where there's a street full of Black businesses and stuff like that. We also have the Rondo Plaza over here that was established. Right now it's wide open. I did an interview over there with Carol Levin, but it was cold and stuff like that. So something like that could have a roof over it. There's a lot of things that reparations, preserving historical monuments, things like that. There's a lot of pieces to it. And like you said, a lot to unpack.
And one thing that I've been thinking is that the Reconnect Rondo effort, are you aware of that, Stefanetta, where they want to build a land bridge and be able to
That's been
redevelop?
about a couple years now. Yeah.
Yeah, and my feeling is that is something that as a city we could definitely do. I mean, it's very expensive, but there's been talk for the last many years about building a river corridor in downtown St. Paul. And I have to say, you know, from my own standpoint, that we have plenty of places for people to access the river in downtown St. Paul. And the river corridor is this big, massive the river balcony would be this giant superstructure that would be built out over the river. And my feeling is, and I would say with our having passed the reparations ordinance, that before we ever build a river balcony, we need to reconnect Rondo. And so I think it's another way of the city saying we are going to make amends for the institutional racism that we have perpetrated and participated in. And we need to start making development decisions that make life better for African Americans, development patterns that fix the wrongs that have been done. And when we were at one of our steering committee meetings recently, and I said, you know, you guys, I just don't know how quickly there could be cash payments. And one of the members of the committee said, with all the stadiums that have been built in these two cities, you're going to tell me that there isn't money to make up to pay reparations to African American people. And I thought, you know what? The world's our oyster here. This is our opportunity to say, you know, the Viking Stadium was $1.5 billion. How much of that came from our tax dollars? Well, you know what? There is money. There's a lot of money.
You'll find money when you need it and you want it.
Exactly.
We find money when you want it.
That's the other part of this, is that Trahern and his group have created this community conversation where we need to face those decisions, those recent decisions that we've made about these so-called priorities. I mean, I've never supported building stadiums with public money. I'm from Boston, where the sports teams build their own stadiums and pay real estate taxes, which they don't here. So it's like, when you think about, like, one quarterback salary would be enough to really pay some nice, yeah. So I think that that this is the beginning of a conversation about what are our priorities going to be as a community. And no one in our community should be suffering because of historic discrimination. We got to fix that. And now's our chance to make wiser use of our tax dollars.
And the resolution also calls for long-term and short-term strategies, so we can start addressing some of this stuff, more quickly.
Yeah.
Right. So we're looking, what I'm hearing is, we're talking reparations from a high-level standpoint, but you're talking locally, how you heal community.
Yeah.
How
we invest in community and people.
And how you invest. And so Dr. Tyner, Artika Tyner, chimed in on the comments too, talking about like this holistic approach, right? That's financial literacy education, as you mentioned earlier, entrepreneurship development. Those are the businesses you're talking about on this Rondo, avenue, and then wealth creation strategies. Yep. And I think those are key things that she added into this conversation that I think are, as you're going and really focusing. And I know there were some things that you touched on that I'm not clear that everybody knows about. Like, Trey, you talked about Dred Scott, right? Dred Scott was free until he got to Minnesota. A freed slave, got to Minnesota, and then was enslaved again. Because we hear so much about how up north was welcoming and inviting.
Actually, a military slavery at Fort Snelling from 1836 to 1838 with his wife Harriet, and I think he had his children with him too. So a lot of people don't know that there was actually slavery here.
But he was free before he got to Minnesota. Let's talk about that. Like, he was freed. And then when he came to Minnesota, he was enslaved.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I actually did a play a long time ago on it. Yeah. So it's just thinking about the stories that Minnesota presents as Minnesota nice, right?
Right.
That
Yep.
Minnesota is the best place to be.
Right. And so Minnesota is one of the most livable cities in America
Top 10,
yeah, but we want it to be the most, but it's one of the worst for Black people.
top 5.
Top 5. So we want it to be, and that's why we think reparations is so important, and that we can make it the best place to live for everybody. And by doing that is by addressing historical systemic racism. So I'm honored Ms. Tyner is.
I know, what a thrill.
Got on here, right? Yes.
But so
Yeah.
it is a
Thank
holistic
you.
approach for, like you said, the criminal justice system. There's an education component. There's a business component to it. Historical monument component to it. There's about 10 components to it that I think that we're going to have to address, and we're going to lead all of the organizations to get involved in this work. Definitely.
Okay. Now, this is going to have to be one of several conversations related to this ongoing discussion. Look, tonight we'll drop some links in here. Thank you, Dr. Tyner, for dropping some other comments and links in here too that you can check out for the racial gap, and also on the Reconnect Rondo conversation, and seeing how communities really get connected, not just talking about it, but how you move forward. What's your number one goal outside of just, you got this done? Like, what's the thing now that would say this is a success for you?
For me, so I'm in my first term as co-chair of the Green Party of the United States. So one big thing to me was I would see people get elected to certain positions, but they wouldn't address race in their first term. So I wanted to make sure as a Black person that if I don't get a second term, I could look back and say, hey, I accomplished the hardest, I addressed one of the serious issues first. So that was a major piece to me. And then just the racial wealth gap. We really got to address the racial wealth gap because it's a crisis. The median income for Black people, like we said before, by 2050 could be 0, and it could be sooner. And that was before COVID. So the main goal this is closing the racial wealth gap and addressing past historical injustice.
Yes. And Jane, what's success look like to you?
Well, obviously what would be success for the African American community would be success for us. I think in the near term, it's winning the confidence of the community that this is something that is going to make a difference, and so that the community will work with us, hold us accountable, and make us make a difference. Because I think we're going to put the framework in place, and I think some really good things are going to come out of it, but we definitely need the community to inform us what success looks like. And winning that confidence and investment from the community in this process will really make a difference.
I want to just add on, Trey, when you talked about, this racial wealth gap, because I know folks here and it's like, okay, well, Black folks are poor, and it's not poor, right? Even educated Black folks, the gap is an educated degree for a Black person will still leave them lower than someone who is white and working
without a degree. Yeah, sometimes.
So it's so off balanced in the conversation. So to have this conversation here, where we're moving forward towards equity and accountability and equity as a city, is groundbreaking.
Wow.
I just want y'all to understand, I know that it's groundbreaking, and when I read it the first time and the digital editor said, oh, we need to do this next, I'm like, that's not real. Let me look at, oh, no, honestly. And I feel like that's where you're going to hear in the community as this becomes more common knowledge, right? because people are still reporting on it and still dissecting it and having these conversations. Because, next time we're going to talk about probably why people are pushing back on it. We don't know yet.
Right.
Yeah. And so I'm thankful that you were on here. So what can we do next as the community as we wait? Because, there's not a website to go to yet, but what can we do to stay informed and to hold folks accountable?
Like she was saying earlier, the reparations reading group.
How do we get there?
Go to Eastside Freedom Library. They have a calendar and you can sign up for it there too.
Okay.
And they have a lot of great stuff happening for Black History Month, just in general. Check them out. Also, you can contact Councilmember James Prince's office, or you can hit me up Facebook or anything like that too.
Yeah. And really, you're absolutely right. We should have our city website should be set up soon. I wish it were already. So I'll get right to work on that.
We didn't want to hold off. We wanted to talk. Let's get the conversations going, and we can keep sharing with the community, but the community needs to know that there's something that they need to come and show up for and not be the last when it's made it to whatever round of news or finalization.
Absolutely.
We want the community in on the actual groundwork and not just to respond.
Yes.
You want to be proactive and not reactive.
Yeah. So we'll be pretty soon here. We're going to be doing some outreach to the community and having forums where people can speak it, and hopefully you guys can help us out with that. So definitely opening the sharing. And as you come with new information, please send it our way to the spokesman so that we can communicate and share that with the community. And you're like Rose said, back to my point, we have never been on a level playing field, and she is so right. And now this is a chance at finding some sort of equity and parity. And so I think that's awesome. If there's any final words that you would like to share, because it's already been an hour, right?
It's amazing. It's been great. And I just want to say, I'm kind of an unlikely spokesperson for the issue, but I just want to say
we need allies.
Well, exactly. I as an ally, I just want to say, it's absolutely what you just said, Stefanetta. It's equity and accountability, and just call us out on it, because we are determined to make good on this. But it's important, the best politics are when people raise hell, and we have to listen. So I get it, and I want to be held accountable. The council does, all 7 of us.
And we'll definitely be having meetings real soon, and we want to get everybody's input and get people involved in it.
Yeah. If people can just send their contact information to me at my city email, then I'll put everybody on a list so we're keeping people in touch.
Okay, definitely. We will drop that into the comments as well. So thank you so much for this part one of an ongoing discussion on St. Paul and the case for reparations.
Thank you, Stefanetta. It's been a great discussion.
Yes. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Everyone who's tuned in, if you have questions, still drop them. We will send them to Councilmember Prince and Trey to continue this conversation. And please, stay aware and stay informed. And we will be sharing all the information that we can through MSR, Spokesman-Recorder.com, and of course, Forefront, where we're bringing issues that are pertinent to the Black community in Minnesota. So thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Till next time. Thank you so much.